going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing another ratings related video in this series for College Football 25. We're going to be covering the defensive line, and we're going to discuss which ratings are most important for your defensive ends and defensive tackles within College Football 25. The first thing that we definitely have to start this video off by saying is that it depends on what you're doing with your defense, of course. There are multiple different defenses in this game. There are defenses in this game that are not within Madden, so this does account a little bit differently than what we've discussed in Madden before, but the general principles still remain the same. In a 3-4 defense, your three defensive linemen are typically going to be run-stopping or power-rushing type of players. In a 4-man defensive line, your two D tackles are going to be more run stoppers but with pass rush capability, and your two defensive ends are going to be primarily pass rush, edge containing type of players, typically a little bit more pass rush focused because a 4-3 defense relies on the 4 down linemen to generate pressure, whereas in a 3-4 defense you generate pressure through blitzes, linebackers, and those types of things. In a 3-3 defense, the stack and that type of thing, it's very similar to a 3-4 with the D-line, where those players are generally responsible for inside responsibilities on the defense, and so therefore they're more run-stop type of players. Your left end and right end are typically going to be responsible for B-gap. Your nose tackle will be responsible for an A-gap, and you'll have a backer over the middle that's responsible for the other A-gap, and then backers that are responsible for contain. So really a lot of the defenses in this game do focus primarily on run-stopping type of players, unless you're going to be utilizing in particular a 4-3 defense, or you also have to consider nickel formations and pass rush formations that put 4 down players on the field but might more so be pass rush focused. So you could, in theory, be a 3-4 defense or a 3-3 stack, but run a lot of nickel, and in those nickel formations, it operates just like a 4-3 defense, where those edge rushers are expected to get a lot of pressure in the pass rush. So with that being said, we're going to kind of discuss these players in categories as edge rushers, which could also technically be your outside linebackers. We're going to discuss it as interior defensive linemen as well. So first up and foremost is going to be your edge rushers. These are players that you're going to want to be athletic and have pass rushing capability, but specific pass rushing capability. So when I look at my defensive ends, my prototypical defensive end is going to have over 80 speed. You want them to be able to track down the quarterback pretty well. You want them to be able to contain fast running backs, and most running backs in this game are going to have 90 plus speed. A lot of quarterbacks in this game are going to have mid to high 80s speed, if not better. So you need to be able to track those players down and contain them. So having defensive ends in a edge rushing type of scheme, in a 4-3 or a nickel type of a scheme that only have, 70 speed, 75 speed, high 70 speed, is not necessarily ideal. You can certainly get away with players like this that have high 70s speed, but this is really truly kind of the bottom end cutoff for those types of players. You're going to typically prefer players that are 80 plus speed, if not getting close to 90 speed, so they can kind of match those players that they're going to have to be responsible for taking down and generating pressure against. Something with these players that can make up for a little bit of a lack of speed is going to be their acceleration. So high acceleration is really important for your edge players, your defensive ends in a 4-3 scheme, because it gets them up to top speed quickly. It gets them quickly around or into offensive linemen and allows you to get your pass rush moves activated quickly, because really you want these players to be getting into the backfield and making pressure as quickly as possible. So acceleration is truly one of the top ratings for this position, and I often think that it is quite overlooked because people are looking specifically for their pass rush moves. And with that being said, we then go to the next most important rating, which is going to be their finesse moves. Yes, generally speaking, your defensive ends, your edge rushers, your edge players, you're going to want to be finesse players. Don't get me wrong, a good edge power rusher can be very effective, but the most effective edge rushers are typically going to have really good finesse moves. A really good example of this is this sophomore defensive end here that has 89 finesse moves. despite the fact that he's only a 68 overall, which means he's really lacking in things like awareness and whatnot, this could be a really effective player because he has 78 speed, which is, like I said, kind of bottom end cutoff, but he's got pretty good acceleration at an 87. You're looking for something in the high 80s into the 90s for that to be pretty solid, if not really good. And then he also has that 89 finesse moves. This guy isn't going to be very consistent because of awareness, play recognition, block shedding, not very good, which isn't ideal. But he's going to be really good in the pass rush potentially. So you're going to want to utilize a player like that in your pass rush scheme. I will say that if you are relying on your defense a lot to make plays, block shedding can be really important for these players. And to be honest with you, while I say that it might not necessarily be the most important thing in the world for you, it is still very important across your entire defensive line to have good block shedding. If you want to stop the run, you want to have good block shedding. Oftentimes, there are even situations where you can get pass rush on a quarterback by having good block shedding. There are times where the block shedding rating is taken into account whenever you're not necessarily doing a pass rush move, you're just straight up shedding a block and getting to the quarterback. So block shedding can be really, really useful at these positions across the entire defensive line. I'm going to focus on it a little bit more for the interior defensive linemen, but as a defensive end, if you really want like kind of a premier defensive end that can do everything that you need them to do, they should have mid to high 80s in block shed. They should have a high 80s into 90s finesse move, and they should have good athleticism. Now, some other ratings are bonuses like awareness and play recognition. Those do make a difference. I do not find that strength is too important at the edge rusher position, but it does sometimes seem to make an impact, especially with players that have really low end strength. One rating that I would focus on outside of what I've already told you guys is going to be your pursuit rating. Having a good pursuit rating is going to allow these players to track down the quarterback, the ball carrier, and those types of things a lot more effectively. It's going to allow them to take better angles to those guys. It's going to allow them to adjust if the quarterback, say, tries to scramble away, makes a cut, the running back makes a cut, whatever it might be. That pursuit rating can help quite a bit, and so can their agility and change of direction, because again, you're comparing this to like quarterbacks, running backs, and those types of players in the backfield that are going to have 90 speed, 90 acceleration, 90 agility, 90 change of direction. So you could find yourself getting beat if you have an unathletic and low pursuit type of a player, despite having pretty high finesse moves and those types of things. So really, that's what you want to focus in on at that defensive end position. There aren't a lot of players that necessarily come away with all of those ratings, but I find that defensive ends, especially if you get high development trait ones, come away progression-wise every single year with really solid progression, and they do tend to round out pretty well. So defensive end is a really good position to recruit and build up, and it can be incredibly impactful on good defensive play for you guys and helping to get pressure on the offense that you're going up against. And then with that being said, we're going to talk about interior defensive linemen. So that really encapsulates your 4-3 D tackles. That encapsulates your 3-4 D tackle / nose tackle, your 3-3 defensive linemen, your 3-4 D ends. Most of those players are going to be more interior type of D linemen, and therefore they're going to be more run game focused. And so by far, in my opinion, the most important two ratings for interior defensive linemen is going to be block shedding and power moves. Block shedding is going to be the number one stat because being able to get off blocks and get off blocks quickly is going to make you a really effective interior defensive lineman, and it's going to make it havoc in the backfield for the opposing offense. I mean, you can get some, kind of mid-rated overall players like this 76 overall that are going to just live in the backfield because of having 88 block shed and being able to get off most offensive linemen's blocks pretty quickly. Most offensive linemen aren't going to have necessarily comparable ratings to really high block shedding, so it can be really effective to just have good block shedders across your defensive line if you run interior defensive linemen, even if you have defensive ends like I had mentioned before. I personally don't like finesse move or finesse rushing interior defensive linemen. I'm not saying that they can't be effective, because they can, especially some of the guys that have pretty high finesse moves. We've seen that in Madden in the past, and I've seen some finesse rushers on the interior work pretty well within college football as well. I mean, typically speaking, like I mentioned, your finesse blockers are going to be on the outside, your power blockers are going to be on the interior. So sometimes you can get away with a finesse move player in the middle, and the opposing offensive linemen aren't necessarily going to be equipped to deal with that as well as offensive tackles would. So it can be effective, but I think the most effective thing on the defensive line, and it has been in Madden, it is in this game as well, is going to be high power moves, because you can just do bull rush and those types of things, and they're going to be really disruptive to the backfield. You can push linemen back, you can really get a push up front, you can get into the quarterback's face quickly. It can be really powerful, especially with some of the abilities that are available within this game for good defensive linemen. So really, if you have a good block shedder and a good power move player, that's going to be most of what you need at this position. The next thing, and really the only other necessarily thing that I want you to consider, is going to be their athleticism. Of course, pursuit is going to be pretty good, because if you're block shedding but you have low pursuit, you might find that you struggle to actually tackle the running back or the quarterback or whatever it might be. So definitely keep pursuit in mind. You would like that to be at the very least into the high 70s, if not into the 80s for pursuit. But other than that, I want to talk about athleticism. You're going to notice a lot of players in this game that have 62 speed, 46 speed, 56 speed, especially on the interior of defensive lines, and that's not good. Trust me, you need players that are capable of getting after players in the backfield. And don't get me wrong, speed isn't everything. It can be made up for with good acceleration. But as you can see with these D tackles that I have on Hawaii, despite them being ranked as 70 plus overall players, none of them have particularly good speed. None of them have particularly good acceleration. They're going to struggle in order to get to players in the backfield. They don't have good agility. They don't have good change of direction. So they might be getting off blocks. They might be disruptive, but they're going to struggle actually hunting players down and making plays that you might like those players to be able to make. So really what I like to say for interior defensive linemen is kind of a cutoff at around 75 speed. So some of my defensive ends, if I could develop them into more interior style of players, this is more ideal as a interior player, in my opinion. Now, you're going to want good strength, so I wouldn't really move any of these guys into the interior, and that kind of falls into the athleticism category. You're going to want, high 80s into the 90s strength, because you're always going to be dealing with offensive linemen. But it is sometimes pretty hard to find the combo in college football as compared to in Madden. In Madden, it's really easy to find a high-strength guy, decent speed, acceleration, and good power moves and block shed. That's not necessarily the case in college football. You're going to get a lot of guys that have high strength, but are going to be really unathletic. Or you're going to get some guys that have good power moves and maybe good block shed, but they're not going to be as strong, and those types of things. So as you can see, this isn't necessarily the ideal defensive tackle, being that he has 88 block shed, but only 86 strength. So that doesn't necessarily always pair up well against offensive linemen on the opposite side. Truly, though, the baselines are relatively similar to Madden, where I would say, again, you want a player that's, at a minimum in the 70s on his speed. I would say 75 plus, but that's going to be really hard to come by if they're going to meet the other requirements. But you're going to want 80 plus acceleration on these guys. Really, the best defensive tackle that I'm seeing here on my team as far as athleticism grades and is the most comparable is going to be this player here with 70 speed, 83 acceleration, 72 agility, 66 change of direction. That is serviceable. The 82 strength is not necessarily the best, and it doesn't look like his other ratings are all that great either, but this is a serviceable defensive tackle. Good athleticism. He's going to be able to track down the ball carrier without really getting, ran by too much by running backs and those types of things. Decent power moves, decent block shedding. That guy is relatively serviceable in comparison to some of the guys that are higher overall than them. This player here, being that he has 46 speed, if this guy's pursuit isn't absolutely phenomenal, which it's not, it's only 75, he's going to struggle to really do anything because of that speed. He's never going to be able to catch a running back or anything unless they run right into him. So really, when you look at some of the best defensive tackles and interior defensive linemen in the game, this is really what you're looking for. You find a guy 76 speed, 80 acceleration, 67 agility. That's fantastic. Can't beat that. 94 strength. He's got 86 power moves, and that's his focus, and he's got 93 block shedding. That's everything you could want in a defensive tackle. Maybe some higher power moves, whatever. It's not the end of the world. And you don't necessarily need to have guys that are a 92 overall, but if you can get a few guys on the interior of your defensive line that are budget versions of Williams here, then you're going to be setting yourself up for a really good defensive line that's able to do what you need them to do in your defensive scheme. And with that being said, I would be curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments section below. Do you do things anything differently with your defensive line? I've tried different combinations before, but really this is just the tried and true method. I prefer running the 3-3 stack or a 3-4 defense in this game more so than anything, but that's mainly because I like having those run stoppers in the middle, and outside backers can kind of be developed really well into really good finesse rushers on the edge. So in my opinion, that's kind of one of the most effective ways to run defense in this game. But I know there's a lot of people that prefer 4-3 as well. I find that defensive ends can be a struggle to recruit. Sometimes if you want those good edge rushers, even at the defensive end position, you might want to recruit outside back or speed rushers and move them over to that defensive end position. Let me know in the comment section, like I said, what do you guys do with your defensive line? Do you move guys around to get them to where they need to go? Because it can be pretty difficult to find players that meet what my requirements are for the defensive line. I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. And with that being said, make sure you guys leave a like, comment, and subscribe. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.